technical glitches, but like everything else, our technology is in a state of transition here at the Commission office, so we had to iron a few things out to get going here, but we'll proceed here right away and jump right in. Here's kind of the game plan for today. I know that, especially for those of you who are the business managers, you're probably more immersed in some of the details of this stuff than I've been able to be, but we thought let's just not assume anything, because we still occasionally get emails from people saying, hey, what's the per pupil amount this year? And that information has been out there for a while, but we don't want to assume, and people are busy with the end of school year and everything. So we're going to walk through that very briefly to start out with, and then get into the collective bargaining and federal impact aid stuff that the program is mostly built to talk about. On collective bargaining, the focus is going to be, the items with budget implications. The urgency, as I understand, people are trying to budget, and so those questions in collective bargaining that affect the budget are the ones that are foremost in people's mind right now. That said, if you've seen in the weekly update from the office, we've been saying if you have collective bargaining questions of other kinds, please let me know. And similarly, if you have Strive High kinds of questions, there's obviously some overlap between the two. Let Doug Muraoka know, and we're working with the department actually more than one department to nail down the answers to those things. And we appreciate those of you who have submitted questions so far, because that helps inform us in terms of what information is needed out there in the field. When we get to federal impact aid, we'll kind of review about how the outlook looks for this coming year, which you'll be pleased to hear is a pretty good one. But we want to inform you of a proposal that the staff is going to the Commission with, because it'll give you an opportunity to weigh in with the Commission. And if we proceed with this proposal, there'll be lots of future opportunities to weigh in on some of the details, and we'll talk about that. And then I just want to conclude with some thoughts about kind of next steps at this point, and maybe some thoughts on next time we go through one of these sort of big rollouts, what my hopes and aspirations are for future ones. These have sort of all come down at the same time as we're in a state of transition here at the office, and I'm new, and other staff people are new, and that is what it is. And we're sort of still in the midst of the Act 130 transition, so there's been a lot happening at once, and hopefully we will learn from these experiences, and we will have a better game plan for the next time we face these big rollouts. Along the way, Lynn, I'll have to defer to you about the mechanics of it, but it's a small enough group, and if there's questions along the way, let's stop and do those. I think particularly about kind of the logical break points in the presentation, maybe I'll just stop and say, does anybody have questions on that one? I will apologize in advance that a Q&A today may be a little bit long on Q and short on A, since there's some things that we're still trying to get at. But even again, getting the questions that are out there is very helpful to us in terms of making sure that we're chasing down the kinds of information that the schools need, and I'll talk at the end about ways we can package that to make sure that your individual question that maybe 5 other schools are wondering about, we can get out to everybody. I saw that Steve had asked Lynn about the logistics of sort of raising your hand and say, hey, I have a question, so I'll let you chime in on that, Lynn.
I was just about to write it out. So I did not mute anybody. So anyone who wants to speak, if you want to, I'm allowing this, to be free discussion as much as possible. If it gets unruly where we aren't able to get all the questions at one time, or not unruly, but if it starts to get confusing where we can't get to everyone's questions, then I might have to, do the raising hand thing. But right now, it is free. If you want to say something, you can interrupt. And ask clarifying questions or whatever you need to. Okay.
Well, let's jump right into then the sort of the review of the per pupil funding. So the budget bill has been signed by the governor, HB 200. Some of this is really basic for people, but we kind of reviewed it just at the last commission meeting with Senator Takuda just to make sure everybody was up on it. And since this will be ideally, the thought is that this webinar will be, the recording will be a resource that's out there for people, so we thought we'd start at the beginning. So again, the per pupil formula takes the enrollment of students in charter schools as a percentage of overall public school enrollment. and then that percentage they apply to the large EDN budget codes in the budget. So these are the 4 codes: school-based budgeting, instructional support, state administration, and school support. And that same percentage, that enrollment-based percentage of student enrollment, is applied to each of those areas, and that's the funding that then becomes the funding that forms the per pupil amount, the aggregate per pupil amount. So just a note that's always important to remember, that EDN 150, which is a big area of special education, that's provided directly by DOE to the schools, so that we don't get that percentage of that particular budget area. And there's some other wrinkles in there, A+ and adult ed and what have you, but the things that aren't in the formula. So for the coming fiscal year, the projected charter enrollment, and we had to revise it mid-session because there was some angst on the part of the legislature that we were not getting our numbers accurate, and we really appreciate the fast turnaround that we got from the schools when we went to all 32 of them and said, can we have a discussion again about what your numbers are looking like, and revise that number for the legislature. And this is so 10,541, and what that comes out to is 5.99% of the total public school enrollment projected for the coming fiscal year. So you apply that percentage to the aggregate amount, the $1 billion from the 4 EDN codes I just talked about, and that gets us to $64.5 million pot for the pupil funding. Now, this is the wrinkle that happened at the 11th hour of the session that was really a surprise to everybody. That you'll recall that Act 130 did away with the formula for funding the panel or the CSAO, which had been this 2% formula off per pupil. And the expectation was that we're just going to have an appropriation from the legislature that will fund the office, and it won't kind of have anything to do with the per pupil at that point. It'll just be a straight appropriation like every other agency does. So instead, what happened at the 11th hour was, lo and behold, the commission's budget was taken off the top of the per pupil funding. And again, that was a big surprise to us and even to our friends in the legislature, like Senator Takuda. The trade-off that the legislative staff were talking about is that, as I understand it, EDN 300, that's the code for things like the superintendent and the CASs and the BOE and all those folks, and their thought was that amounts to twice as much as the commission budget anyway, and we are getting the 6% credit for that. So there was a sense that maybe it's double dipping if we also get our budget on top of the per pupil, when the per pupil already includes twice as much on that sort of administrative end of things. And I don't want to get into the nuances of that because I'm sure that you can debate about, well, the CASs serve charters or whatever, but that's sort of the thinking, just to help people understand what might have been going on on the part of the legislative people who are working on that. In the end, the amount that did come off the per pupil was somewhat less than 2% would have been, but that's not of great consolation when the expectation going in was sort of that the per pupil amount would not be impacted at all by the commission amount. So this is how the numbers turn out. So that 64, you take the commission budget off of it, and it leaves that 63. Divide that by the projected enrollment for the coming fiscal year, and you get the $59.95 per pupil amount. I saw that there were some comments coming up. I didn't know if they were questions or whether we want to address those before we kind of move on to the collective bargaining end of things, talking about the per pupil.
Can you see them? Can you see the questions, or do you want me? Do you want to address them now, or do you want to address them later? I don't.
If it's per
do you want them addressed now, or do you want them to be addressed later? At the end of the call, or not at the end of the call, but after this section. You know what? I'll go back to these when you're done with the per pupil calculation. Then we can go back to the questions.
Okay, we're kind of about to go into collective bargaining, so if we have per pupil ones, we can talk about those now.
So, Okay, so the first one is Steve's question. Not all funds in EDN 150 is for special education. EDN is CSSS, Comprehensive School Support Services, which include more programs than just SPED. In the past, adjustments were made to address this. I know a little bit about this, but I have to do some double checking. EDN 150 at the time of, and Kathy, you're on the line, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so EDN 150 at the time of the equity study did bring up this problem. My understanding after that, the report that came back from the DOE that went to the legislature addressed, and I got to go read it again, but it addressed those categories that were brought up under EDN 150 that weren't for special education, and they moved it to an EDN line item. I think it was either 300 or, I don't know, 200 or one that we do have access to. They moved it to that because of the charter school funding. But let me check on the report. I remember reading it maybe about a year and a half ago. So I'll check. Do you remember anything about that, Taff?
Yeah, you're right. This is Katie, but you're right, Lynn. It was the things that we identified were adjusted.
Okay.
It was like the driver's ed that was going through DCCA, athletics, nurses or health aides in schools. Those were the big ones. But everything that was identified was moved before the end of that year, and it was moved into EDN 100.
Okay. So the follow-up question from Steve is, we'll check EDN 150 that it only has SPED funds. The other extension to that is the ongoing process regarding SPED funds. Should EDN 150 only have SPED funds now, and I'll double check on that, is just making sure that we get fair support from these categories anyway. So that's a continued discussion. But Steve, I will definitely do that. After this is done, I'll go ahead and print the log of the question, the chat, and that's made available as well. Okay, so another question would be, the formula is based in law 302B as being on the same level as DOE. When you deduct the commission budget, it does not equal to what's stated in law. So the 302 budget, and do you want to make a comment on this, Tom, or do you want me to go ahead?
No, you can go. I mean, I think my understanding of the thinking behind the decision is the one that I laid out, and whether or not that kind of, you can argue about whether it's legal or not, but that was the thinking.
Okay, so let me kind of tell you what kind of went and what happened throughout that time. So when we had put this discussion together, because all of the board and the DOE central expenses and any cost to run the Board of Education is included in the EDN categories that we have access to right now. That is why at the end of the game that they said, the legislature gave the reasoning that any commission support should be supported within the per pupil budget. The only reason why I vehemently disagree with that is because when we were going through this whole process, it was approved by the governor, it was approved by both the WAM and finance committees as the budget was going through, and it was approved the additional 2% that was a line item, budget item. So, I don't know what to say for that, except for in the existing language, it talks about it being fair distribution of the general fund money, and that's what, and so it isn't in in alignment with the law technically, but of course not with the spirit of what we asked for and what was approved all the way up until the quote-unquote 11th hour.
And I'll just chime in. Lynn, I was just going to chime in that I'm anticipating sort of at the end, but we'll kind of wind up this thing with some discussion about some discussions that we can be having with the legislature during the interim about issues like this.
Yeah. Okay. And next question is about, or next comment or question is about, I think, Steve, what you meant was why doesn't the commission go to the legislature and point out the misappropriation? And I believe, I guess I'll leave that question for you, Tom, in the.
We'll talk about that at the end. Some of the things.
Budget does not come out of general funds, DOE budget. My understanding, Steve, is that the BOE budget does come out of the DOE funds, one of those categories, but good to know, and I'll go ahead and go back and double check that.
Can I just ask, are you folks still getting the presentation? Because we're getting a pop-up saying the connection with the GoToMeeting server has been lost. Are you still showing me?
I still show that you're on a page that has $5,995 per pupil. But if you move forward, if you can reconnect. Oh, I see collective bargaining up now. So
okay, now we just got the message saying it's been reestablished. So. Okay.
So Steve, I'll get to that, and if you want to go ahead and start with collective bargaining.
Okay. So we've got three big unions in motion right now, and in terms of the budget implications for schools, these are they're separate appropriation bills that get us the funds to pay for the collective bargaining agreements on top of the per pupil funding. So these are the bills and the bargaining units to which they correspond. Bargaining unit 13 is still in limbo right now because the state's offer has been rejected, but the others are all out. It's one factor to keep in mind, and I'll explain why it's important in terms of where we go from here. But this is the numbers that we're talking about are based on an August snapshot of employment. So they're looking at what the employee roles looked like in all the schools, DOE and charter, back in August. And based on on those positions, that's August 2012, based on where the people were this past school year in August, that's how they're calculating what the amount needed to be in these agreements to appropriate the money that would pay for all the things that were agreed to between the unions and the state. One caveat there is they only considered filled positions, not ones that were sort of just on the books but vacant. So only live bodies at the time in August was how they based this number. So one big question that has come up is where is the 5% labor savings restoration? So and the way that has worked is in all of those DOE education codes that we talked about, the 4, there is money that's been put into those specifically to pay for the 5% labor savings restoration. What that means is, unfortunately, if it's not actually in the collective bargaining appropriation, it's already factored into the per pupil that the DOE schools and the charter schools are getting. So that the labor restoration savings, the savings restoration is already in that $59.95 amount.
So before you go on to the next slide, there's a couple questions having to do with the slide before. Before that, Jennifer Hero said, what about BU6?
I haven't seen BU6 information. Maybe somebody on the call knows what the status is on that one. I haven't seen any information on that one. Are they even up for renegotiating right now? That's educational officers.
Okay, so that's within the HGEA.
Right.
You know what might be helpful? What might be helpful? I remember the discussions being something about that there were some that haven't signed agreements yet. Do you remember that discussion? And whether or not they allocated money for them? Or
yeah, I'll have to chase that down. The agreements that I got from all the state people were these ones, because these ones corresponded to the legislation, and I don't know if that means were they on a kind of the same negotiation timeline as everybody else, or they've got an agreement that isn't up right now since there's no legislation for funding it?
Okay, since we don't have the answer to that question, I'll note that question on the chat, and we'll get back to that. Steve asked, which August are you talking about? 2012? That's correct, Steve.
Yeah.
It is August 2012. Could we see the figures for DOE and charters in the separate bargaining unit? You do have that, yeah? Tom?
We're...
Hold on.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to get from BNF, I'm getting ahead of myself because I got this in a future slide, but they have the snapshot information, and they apparently have everything. It's all built up by employee, so it's not by school. And that's one thing that we're working with BNF. We need to crosswalk that information with them to get it by school, but they do have it separated out, the aggregate numbers by charter versus DOE.
So why don't we do this? Why don't we continue so that we can see what you have on the future slides, and then we'll come back to this question, or if Steve wants to clarify, if he wants to see, something in addition to that.
Yeah, and but before I move on, actually, I neglected to do something right at the front. I should mention that I'm joined here on our end by our new financial performance manager, Layla Shar, who's madly taking notes in the same way that Lynn is, so we can kind of all regroup afterwards on the. Yeah, I mentioned that there's some things where we'll be long on Q and short on A, but we'll know what those Qs are, and we'll be able to go chase them. And so, Layla, if you just want to say hello real quick to the group. And
hello.
So. We look forward to the chance to introduce Layla to all of you, maybe on July 15th, but you are certainly welcome to contact her as well in the interim. And she's at layla@hcsao.org, although as you may have read in the update, we're changing over the website and the email extensions over the coming months to reflect the commission. So moving on past the labor savings, so the other issue, so where are the step increases? So we'll start with the teachers. Again, so the raises are provided for, this is actually not, it's step increases versus the change in the salary scale. It's provided separately in the collective bargaining bill, not in the per pupil. Again, there's no change this year in the salary schedule. It's a step increase. What that equates to, we're told, is on average 2.95%. When is it effective? That question came up by one of the schools. Is it is it July 1st or is it later? It's the first working day of the first semester. So if you're talking about, how many months of the year and then budgeting for cash flow and that kind of thing, that's the date upon which this step increase becomes effective. Some caveats to that. New hires do not get the step increase. And the question has come up, well, if I'm hiring somebody out of a DOE school and they're already bargaining Unit 5, are they a new hire for purposes of that or not? And I will tell you that in asking around to people in the state, I've had some initial, again, off-the-cuff reactions by several people that have come out in different places. I mean, one school of thought says, well, when you leave DOE, you leave DOE, and so you're a new hire. And another school of thought says, well, you're still bargaining Unit 5, so that's one that we already know is on our list of questions that we're still trying to chase down.
Just as a clarification, Tom, in any case, you did say that these step increases are not applicable for this school year. Is that correct?
No, the step increase is.
The step increase is.
The step increase is for this year, and then it's more like in the nature of a raise in the second year, and then I think the third year it's a step increase again, but it's over the multi-years. But the step increase is effective this year, but the salary schedule stays the same. Just people move on.
It's the bonus that's not effective till next year.
Right. The salary schedule changes next year. This year we use the same one, but everybody bumps up except for new hires. Obviously, if you're already at the top step, you don't go up a step. So instead, what they've done for those people is they've said it's a $1,500 bonus. And that $1,500 bonus, the timeline on that is it's payable no later than the first pay period after October 1st. there's a little bit of time leeway as to when, if you have anybody who's already at the top step, that's when the date by which you have to have paid that bonus. I guess I should, the backdrop to all this, by the way, of course, is that charter schools can negotiate supplemental, so there's some aspects of this that maybe some schools will want to be taking up with their own bargaining units. Even if your faculty agreed, though, the HSTA board has to agree, and they're, not wild about sort of undermining the master agreement with charter school teachers getting less. So we can talk about that later. So the professional development, that question came up a lot early on. Where is the funding for the professional development? Is it even funded? And we even were going back and forth with the HSTA who weren't sure. But the costs for the PD are reflected in the collective bargaining appropriation. I think I saw Steve had asked about the aggregate number, and I will have that in a sec here, Steve, because that gets to sort of the next steps that we want to talk about too. One caveat to that, if teachers are using this extra PD and as a result they're getting enough credits that they gain a reclassification, the resulting salary increases are not separately sort of projected and attempted to be budgeted. So you may have some gains in pay by employees as a sort of indirect result of the PD requirement, and that's something to have on your radar. The other piece that's in there in this first tier is there's a pay differential for hard-to-staff locations. And so the salary of these individuals is supposed to be $15 higher per year for each of the next 2 years. That does mean it's $3,000 higher the next year, but in each of these years it's $1,500 over, is my understanding. So these are the complexes, and I look at the names of the complexes, they don't correspond exactly with the list of complexes, but this is the way the agreement reads. So that's another question to sort of chase down, is how does this actually align to what we think of as complexes. But these are the locales that the agreement identifies, and you'll see that a bunch of those do have charter schools in them, several do not. But that's what they're talking about in terms of hard-to-staff locations. This one is...
Tom, you have an FYI from Jennifer Hero.
Okay.
Where she says, we just hired a teacher who transferred from a DOE school.
Yeah.
Just got her SF5, and it does reflect step increase. So transfers already in the DOE are not considered new hires for that.
Okay. That's the value of this call is there's no doubt there's questions out there where some of you on the call have the answers closer at hand than I do. So we'll confirm that, but just because sometimes there's some nuances in how different people do things, but that's good to know.
Okay. The next is, are charters required for these increases? And I'm thinking that he's referring to the hard-to-staff locations increase. Yeah.
Yeah, and so let me get to that in this next one. So one thing is that these hard-to-staff, these bonuses are not budgeted separately in the collective bargaining appropriation bills. And my latest information is that's true of both DOE schools and charter schools. I had some initial information that it was maybe just charter schools, which led me to believe that this would not apply to charters if it's not funded. But now it seems like maybe they're not budgeted anywhere. So again, we'll continue to chase down that one. At a minimum, the fact that they're not funded could influence what the school's position is going to be in negotiations over a supplemental. And I guess the only caveat there is, there's labor relations considerations, and if they did apply differently in your nearby schools, and you said, look, if it's not funded, we can't do it. There may be some disadvantage in recruitment and retention. Yeah, we're not talking a vast amount over the course of a whole year, so maybe people make decisions about where they want to teach based more on the school than that amount of money, but it's just something to have on your radar as to that. And Steve is saying exactly what I just said. You don't want to be at a competitive disadvantage as to that. But so those amounts, my understanding, my latest, and just of this morning, is that they're not budgeted separately in the appropriation bills. Actually, maybe let's stop and see if there's other HSTA questions out there that schools could use our help nailing down before we move on very briefly to the other bargaining units.
I don't see anything written.
Okay, well, we'll stop at the end of the whole thing. So if the question comes up in your mind later, there's still time at the end. And you all, of course, you also all know where to reach me, so that works too. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the other bargaining units. I will say that I have not had a chance to immerse myself in these agreements like I've tried to get into the HSTA one, just because the HSTA/Strive High stuff is so front and center on a lot of things. But generally speaking, UPW, they have a 2% raise coming in October, and then another 2% raise in April. And I think that's the case for the next couple of years, that every 6 months there's a 2%. So they've kind of, rather than having a big one at one time, they're sort of doing it incrementally like that over the years. And here too, the raises are provided in the collective bargaining appropriation bill. And Steve, I haven't forgotten your question about the aggregate amount. It's just that the aggregate amount we have is sort of puts all the bargaining units together. So after I kind of tick through these things, I'll talk about the numbers at the end. Unit 2, HDA, Blue Collar Supervisory, 4% raise. That's effective as of next week, and again provided in the appropriation bill. 3 and 4, they're kind of handled similarly, so I've lumped them together here too. And the way it works here is there's a step increase again versus as opposed to a regular raise. The employees employed as of June 30th all get the step increase this coming month. There's apparently a new maximum step on the ladder called M, and although going forward you don't get to jump from L to M until you've spent 3 years at L. For this agreement, right, if you're already going to M, that's effective right now. And then after that, anybody who gets to it after that, it'll take them 3 years to get up that last rung of the ladder. And here again, it's in the appropriation bill. So let's talk about the numbers now. And Lynn and I went over and met with BNF to talk about it, and we're, you know, I will confess that we were scratching our heads a little bit about, you know, is this really enough to cover everything? The caveats are, you know, it's an August snapshot. There may be some pieces that aren't included. I'm trying to nail down another question, which is Unit 13 in this number? Because if that's sort of still not finalized, is this calculation not including that, and that would maybe account for some of the difference. But we asked BNF just hypothetically to run us the number if it were distributed to the charter schools on a per pupil basis. And my understanding, I'm skipping ahead here, is that the last time we went through this, it was done on a per pupil basis. And I'll tell you, BNF's reaction was, why are you even asking that question? Because this isn't a per pupil thing at all. But based on the enrollment projection of 10,541, it comes out to about $100 per pupil, and that leads to the issue that I just flagged. Last time, apparently, I'm told it was done per pupil. The advantages of that are that it's simple and it's fast. It's not error prone. We get you the money, and you can budget right away, knowing what it is versus waiting to see what the calculation is based on your August snapshot. The downside is it's pretty inexact. Again, this is supposed to be an employment cost rather than anything having to do with per pupil enrollment. So Layla and I have been talking to people about, you know, what does it take to get us the actual numbers on employment? And I'm told that in the past, CSAO has also done it this way. They've actually done it based on the snapshot, the employment snapshot. Our sense, hopefully not too naively, is that this calculation should be a pretty manageable task. We're not talking about 50,000 employees here. We've got the data that BNF is missing, and they've got the data we're missing, and we ought to be able to marry those two pretty readily and run the numbers by school, and then that should be more aligned to the actual school cost. And in theory, again, these appropriations are supposed to make you even on this stuff. I will say if we run it this way, and it reveals that there's, people are still scratching their heads saying, this just doesn't get me there. I think we want to know that. And I think, I understand the appeal of going per pupil and getting it done fast, but that might obscure the more sort of accurate data about it. Are these appropriations bills really getting us where they're supposed to, which in theory is to make us whole in the stuff, with the caveat, of course, that it's an August snapshot, so there may be some differences since August, from last year to this year that wouldn't be reflected there. I've been seeing the question field popping up, and so I'll stop, and Lynn, if you want to, before we move on, queue any of those up.
Okay, so you have a couple, Steve makes a comment that everybody can see that that the number is low, and then it's better to do, his second comment was better to do by employee calculations by school. Is the most equitable way to distribute, not per pupil. So yeah. What we can do, I mean, it is. I think it was done from what Tom was just saying, and the recollection of previous conversations that we've had is that it has been done per pupil. The ease of it in the past, and because people didn't try to work out all of the information and data so that they could get it by employee. Or maybe they had, at least once before. I think, when do you expect, Tom, the distribution to take place for the collective bargaining?
It's in a slide, and I'm afraid I don't have the hard drive space in my brain to remember, but I'll move ahead, and I think it's in there.
Okay. That was one of the things I think that we had talked about that we thought was fairer, that it would be done, by employee. So as he moves forward, then I think if there's some kind of consensus or just feedback, and then Tom, you can give your thoughts on that as well as we move down the throughout the PowerPoint. So why don't we continue until we get to those things, and then we can better, I guess, feedback to whatever proposal the commission staff is thinking.
Yeah, I think my inclination right now is, unless there's something shocking about, this is going to take a month or something like that, I just can't imagine that it's going to take that long to run the numbers. And again, I think we're going to have more precise data. Will be better aligned to what the school's actual costs are, and especially if there is some issue with the funding not aligning to the cost, we need to know that, and that's how we find out. So that's my inclination at this point.
Okay, so you do have Sandy Kelly saying that it would be better to be done by employee. And then Steve has a follow-up question. Will the distribution be done the way that the per pupil is distributed, 60-30-10, or is it done all at once?
That one, I think it's all done at once. I mean, the reason that we, the statute sets forth the per pupil that way, but another reason why we kind of break things out, and you'll hear me talk about this when we get to Impact 8, is that we do a truing up later in the year. If it's an enrollment projection, we need to know what the actual numbers were and have the ability to adjust that easily. But this is based on an August snapshot. It's not being trued up. In fact, that's one of the things you just have to be aware of, is that your amount is going to be stuck in time for last school year, but we're not adjusting the amount for what things are this year, so there's less need to do it that way. We just get the money out.
So FYI, Steve, I think in regards to the 60-30-10, the answer is no, it will not be distributed that way. It would be all at once. The other thing is he makes a comment that says all schools could run their number by bargaining unit. Just as a reminder, the appropriation amount is based upon August of last year, so you would have to go back to those numbers. The other thing, though, in sitting down with Budget and Finance regarding some of the information that is needed and the information that is not needed, that they can't get to, and all that other kind of things to do the calculation per school. Just as an FYI, there are a few, I think he gave us a list of maybe 30 or so employees that aren't assigned to a bargaining unit right now from schools. So when it comes to a lot of the benefits information, whether it be unit or, you know, UTF, ERS stuff, on a separate project, this is a little bit of a tangent, but very related, on a separate project, having information to be able to do that is going to be really instrumental moving forward. And that's where we're working on, like, with Art Buto of the commission staff to make sure that we get these things, you know, aligned so that we can get that done. So just as an FYI, okay, I'm going to go to a couple other thoughts.
Actually, Lynn, before you do that, let me just chime in on that and piggyback a little bit, because aside from the collective bargaining things for this purpose, and I don't know what the implications are if you had some of these sort of orphan employees in August, what they did. Did they arbitrarily pick something, or did they just say, well, we don't have the data, so there's no money there? I mean, I don't know. That's something we can ask them. But my understanding is actually that Mary Jane has been working with the schools on finding homes for these so-called 00 coded employees everywhere. And in fact, we're doing that the same internally, because we're all 00 at this point, and the marching orders have been everybody needs to find a home. Again, not that we're in the bargaining unit, but we're tethered to somewhere for these purposes. And I think that the schools have been responsive and helping get that straightened out from what I last heard from Mary Jane. So thank you for your help on that.
Okay, and it does still play into all the data stuff that we have to talk about on another call. So I'm looking at some of my notes from a previous discussion. So just as an FYI, there are 55 listings with that the CSAO or Mary Jane is working on to make that all clear. So to clear up their bargaining units. Okay, so so this is Jennifer from Innovations. Will this just be for 1 year, as it has in the past, or for each of the 2-year budget? We have not gotten more than the first year in the past. It's 1 year.
Well, yeah, I've actually was focusing everything on this coming school year, but the budget amounts, I mean, these collective bargaining appropriation bills are biennial bills. So there's money in there. Am I understanding the question correctly?
Yes, we had an additional conversation, or in one of the conversations anyway, the money on the 99, from my understanding, was based on 1 year because of the release. Like, they don't know, because the second year is confusing or something like that. So I guess, you know, what we will do on that is just to double check and make sure that it's a 1 year amount. But yeah, let's definitely highlight that as a question that we need to clarify. And then Steve Hirakami, if it comes all at once, will it be timely? The impact starts in a week.
Yeah, I'll again, I think I have that in here.
Okay, so let's go move on to the next slide, and then hopefully we'll get that covered.
So again, in terms of running the numbers, Layla's running over to meet with the BNF people just this afternoon, and we've requested, can we get the non-school specific data, and then we can crosswalk it with the employee data that we have and try to get those school calculations done. We were told, I think most recently, that hopefully the funds are all allocated in time to be available by August. So it's not, you know, next week, even though some of these things kick in. But others of them kick in at the beginning of the school year versus July 1. So.
Yeah. Are there any of the collective bargaining increases that will kick in July 1st? It sounded like none of them would.
Well, I think there might have been some of them. If you go back to the slides, I've got some in there. I think there were a few, whether they were step increases or whatever that kicked. I think one of the non-HSTA units had one that was July 1st. But I think most of the HSTA ones are the biggest one, and those are going to be the first payroll period after the start of the semester.
So one of the other things that they were saying is, you know, you have to pay it once there is the pay. So it's when it's effective, and then the next pay period, I guess, when you actually have to pay it.
Right.
So it's not like you have the, you need to have the money on July 1st, but despite that, definitely the commission should get it to you as soon as they get it.
Right.
Okay, so you have another question from Steve. Will Mary Jane factor in our Ceridian payroll cost to the BNF? Is that a good question to come back to?
I'm not sure. I'm going to make sure I understand the question. He's not talking about using the data from Ceridian. He's talking about
I'm thinking the cost of using Ceridian.
Of using
Is
Ceridian?
that going to? I think so. So Steve, if you can clarify that question, and then we'll make sure that Tom gets back to you on that.
Yeah,
I don't know that you would have that detailed information.
No, I don't have that. And then this last bullet point on the timeline was the one that Steve alluded to. That if you're trying to nail down your budget now, you can go back to your own August employment snapshot and take a look at your people and what units they are. And again, just with the admonition, don't count vacancies because those weren't counted. But that should give you a sense. Again, in theory, if the numbers have been done right, that you're supposed to be made whole by with the exception of those two things I identified that weren't budgeted, like the hard to staff. It's supposed to make you whole on those sorts of things.
Oh, okay. So the clarification, Steve Hirakami, we have a split payroll, DOE and Ceridian, yes. We want to make sure that all employees are factored in by BNF. That's correct. So that was the explanation that Tom was talking about, that he's going to take the Ceridian information that the CSAO/commission staff has been doing and all of those employees and put it together with the BNF DOE employees that they keep record of, and through both is how they determine all the employees.
Right.
So that was his clarification. Sandy Kelly says, when is the first per pupil allocation expected to be sent to schools? I think, are you going to get to that after in upcoming slides? Did you say that?
I didn't actually have that. I mean, our assumption and our goal is to get it out along the sort of historically, it's, I guess, around July 20th that it's come out, and that's our goal to do it consistent with that. That's a requirement.
And FYI, sparked a conversation that we had with Budget and Finance when I asked him, there's differences from, say, the August payroll to the August employee count to now, and what happens in the rest of the system, all the different departments, when they come up either with an overage or a shortage of money, depending upon how the move of employees took place. And their answer was each department either eats it if by utilizing whatever funds that they have, or the opposite, they end up with extra money for that particular department. So just as an FYI, if anybody was wondering. The first answer. Okay, next one is, how did BNF calculate our appropriation if it did not have our Ceridian payroll information?
So what BNF does not have is the identification of the school at which the employee worked in August. They have built up the aggregate information based on all the employees, so it's employee by employee, and they know which ones are charter employees, but they don't get into which school the person works at. That's what we're trying to crosswalk and make sure we can pin down.
So BNF does have the information.
Yes, that's right. What they don't have is the school-specific information, and so we're trying to get their data because we have that, and then we can run the numbers ourselves.
Okay. Okay. So federal impact aid now?
So federal impact aid, unless anybody has other collective bargaining things they want to ask. Again, we'll stop at the end if
we can
see you later.
And if you guys, I want to respect time because we did have this scheduled for 11. And this is really important. So as we move forward, if you have any additional comments, we can always come back to it at the end. Comments or questions?
So sorry I'm being so long-winded here, but we'll wrap this up here pretty quick. Federal impact aid is the other piece of the puzzle that's out there, the big one. And the annual amounts, as you know, fluctuate quite a bit. there's a lot of variables that some of them are beyond our control, like what Congress appropriates in a given year. One variable that is worth noting, because Layla had a conversation with the DOE people about this just this week, we've been told that the parent survey card return rate from charter schools is nothing to write home about, and that really is a huge factor in terms of how, I'm not saying charter schools are a huge factor because we only have 10,000 students, but the return rate on those parent survey cards is a big factor within, at least marginally within our control, that can impact the numbers that we get out of the feds. They're due in September, and it's not really a commission requirement kind of a thing, but we will kind of tee up that as a reminder, a little bit of cheerleading there to the schools to sort of say, because it does affect the bottom line in a few steps removed, but it does affect us, so that's just something to note. So over the past years from 2005 till now, the aggregate amount of federal impact aid to charters has ranged from about $1.5 million to $2.75 million. It's impact aid, like the per pupil. It's a enrollment percentage of the overall public school enrollment that determines which goes to charters. So the per pupil amount has ranged over those same years from $188 to $312, and the $312 actually was a bit of an anomaly because that was in 2005, so pretty early on when the enrollment was a lot lower. So that's what happened there. So federal impact aid, this year's funding, the good news is, based on, and again, it's based on last year's sort of survey cards and what Congress appropriated and all these multiple variables, is projected to increase significantly. So the charter portion, based on last year's enrollment percentage, is expected at this point to go up from last year's aggregate amount of 2.7 to 4.2, so quite a significant jump. The big caution that everybody says with every other breath when they talk about this is they think this is really a temporary bump. It's an anomaly, and they remember what happened with ARA. A lot of money coming in all at once, but the federal government, every other thing they were saying was there's a cliff coming, there's a cliff coming. Don't bank on this for the next 10, 15 years. And so that's the same caution that's being sounded here about this per pupil funding. And so it does raise the question about, is there a way to be strategic with this sort of one-time bump, recognizing at the same time that the schools have depended on per pupil for their operating needs. And that's how come I want to talk about a proposal that we want to make to the commission and invite the schools to be weighing in on this proposal. So just by way of background, the legislature has just passed the cleanup bill to Act 130 called Senate Bill 244. The governor is expected to sign it any day here. And that bill authorizes the commission, there's many things in it, but among other things, it authorizes the commission to make a facilities funding budget request for the charter schools to BNF, and then the legislature will consider it. In the law, it says that the commission is to adopt criteria for the distribution of any funds that were to be appropriated that are based on performance and need of the school. So the proposal that we're floating with the commission is to invest, and this is very important, part of the increase in impact aid into getting this thing off the ground now, even before the 2014 session when we would be going to the legislature asking them to put some funding into such a program. So this is kind of, I'm just putting it, this is exactly the same information that's going to the Administration and Operations Committee tomorrow. Looking at the overall amount, this kind of breaks it down for you in what the per pupil amounts are and what the aggregate amounts are. And it talks about, if you were to sort of divvy it up between just getting it out on a per pupil basis to help people with their operating costs, and maybe investing some portion of it a little bit more strategically to try to set us up to have a better conversation with the legislature in the coming session. My recommendation is, it's a nice clean number, but I guess the notion was we'll say we're distributing on a per pupil basis more than the schools got last year, and that's still leaving about $1 million for us to get a needs and performance-based facilities funding program kind of going. But this is what, if you were to do it on a different basis, including all or nothing, this is how the numbers would play out. So and this is again what I'm putting to the commission for their consideration too. These are how the numbers play out if you'd want to think about it in different terms. Now let's talk about the criteria, because I already did get an expression of concern based on the description of the agenda item about the performance criterion and what's that going to look like. So again, the legislature's admonition is it be based on performance and need. And what I am saying to the commission is that it's very important that the criteria that go with such a program recognize that there's a degree of tension between performance and need. So, you know, there's lots of research that establishes a link between the quality of your school facility and academic outcomes. And of course, Hawaii charter schools know all too well that your financial health can be really burdened by your unmet facilities needs. And that's something that the commission would have to take into consideration as it thinks carefully about how to fulfill this legislative requirement that it be performance and need-based. One possible option is, rather than have, if you kind of envision an X and a Y axis where one axis is performance and the other is need, and you kind of have it in there, an alternative to that is actually to make it a two-step process. So first you take a look at things based on a need criterion, and you make a determination about how you're going to sort that out. And after that, you kind of look at the performance kind of thing. And again, with the application of this, you're considering and maybe inviting the charter schools to kind of to comment on how, in their view, the performance side is impacted by this need, so that can be a factor as the commission were to weigh this stuff. Just to let you know what the timeline is on this suggestion, the Admin and Ops Committee meets tomorrow, and then the way we tee things up, where we want it to go through the committees to sort of hash it out a little bit first, is the following commission meeting typically is when the full commission considers a recommendation that the committee has come forth with. So that if it were to go on that timeline, it would be July 11th. Now, one issue here is, my inclination here on the staff is not to go just tee up discussion items with the commission before we've done our homework on the staff end. And so you may wonder, well, why go ahead and start this down the pipeline before we've actually fleshed out what the criteria would look like? And I guess my reason is this. Number one, if we get guidance on this proposal to divvy it up between per pupil and between this kind of more strategic investment, we can get you that, we can nail down that per pupil number for you sooner. And so part of it is just in the urgency of getting people what's going on, we wanted to get moving on that part, because that's the easier sort of just approve the broad parameters, and then we'll come back to the commission with a more fleshed out recommendation. And as to that more fleshed out recommendation on the criteria, our approach, like all the other things we've been doing, is we want to engage the schools in developing that process. We want to kind of float things by the schools, get their comments, hear what we maybe have missed in what we've come up with to kind of set forth how it would work, and so that it's a more informed proposal by the time we go back to the commission with it. It has to be acknowledged that when you're talking about facilities needs of 32 schools, and $1 million is not a lot of money on the facilities end of thing. And so I think the symbolic importance of it and the operational importance of it is potentially where it's at. I mean, I think it represents an opportunity in my mind for the charter movement to put its money where its mouth is, when we're always telling policymakers that the great unfinished business for charter schools in this state is doing something about facilities. And in fact, when we have an opportunity to start down that path, even in this, not huge way, but we're going to go through the hard work of figuring out these difficult questions about how you do this fairly, because we firmly believe that this is a critical need, and we're willing to put our money where our mouths are when we have the opportunity to do so. And then that sort of the idea is we would have this in place so that when we go back to the legislature during the session, or to BNF before that, when it's the governor's proposal, to say we want to move forward with this, and we've already got the groundwork laid here to be able to move ahead. So it's really about, can we put some capital into this thing now that we've got it. And again, the idea is still to distribute more per pupil to the schools than last year, and frankly more than in any other year since that first year that I mentioned before.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
You know, I know at least I'm running a little bit tight on time, and I was wondering if I'm wondering if it's possible to meet what you're saying by saying let's distribute like the 300, which makes everyone whole for what they're expecting, and the remainder that is, you know, yet to be seen on what the charters, you know, what kind of say they will have in the distribution of the remainder of that money, if it could be just put on the side or reserved for either a per pupil distribution or a needs facilities based until you can get more more feedback from schools, just so that you can, you know, get that 300 out the door and into schools. And then while you're developing everything, you don't have to come up with, yes, it's going to be done by, you know, this facilities fund, or be transferred into this facilities fund, and you don't have to rush necessarily until you get back everybody's, you know, kind of input. Could you do that?
Yeah, that's something I consider.
Or make that
I've
recommendation instead?
Yeah, let me think about that, because I really think that there's some pretty powerful strategic value to going ahead with it. But I'll think about it, and I'll certainly raise that with the committee tomorrow when we talk about it. That's some feedback we received today.
Okay.
So
and
let
of
me.
course, what's the school's feedback? That's just my kind of hoping to get the money into schools' pockets quicker.
So let me blow through these next ones really fast, since you're.
Could you? I'm so sorry, but I've got to get onto a plane in a little while, so I want to make sure that this gets out to schools as soon as possible, and it'll take me a little time to get it whatever.
Okay, I'm going to speak in auctioneer mode here. So one aspect here is that the other good news on Impact Aid is I think we're going to get it early this year. Some years it's been, you know, I understand, like as late as January or something, but it may be even August, which would be great. And this gets to Steve's question, actually, that he asked about the other thing, about if we do get it before the October 15 enrollment count, we'll probably want to withhold some just so that we can do that reconciliation on the back end. So next steps coming up. Keep submitting questions like this. You know, something's going to occur to you after the call's over. You know where to reach us. We're looking at maybe Q&A or FAQ documents, and maybe getting those out to people so the people who weren't part of the conversation can get the information. One question that's come up is when do we actually have to submit our budget to the commission now that it's been delayed, and what are the forms going to be? We'll work with the schools on that. And I alluded to this earlier, but Senator Takuda has expressed interest in doing some more fact-finding and maybe even talking about legislation and supplemental budget requests dealing with these funding issues. So that's the conversation we'll be having going forward. I'll just pass this slide. It's kind of self-explanatory, but supplemental agreements, what are we doing now? And there's some Strive High questions, so get us those as well. Just a parting thought here is, you know, there's a lot of big rollouts happening all at once right now. And one conversation that we hope to be having with the Department of Education and others is ways to engage the charters in the development process along the way and planning the rollout a little more on the front end. And they're receptive to that. And sort of learning from the experience that we've had with these rollouts about how the next time a big thing comes along, we'll hopefully have the questions sort of framed and the answers ready for people right when the big announcement happens, not trying to be chasing it afterwards. And I understand that that's frustrating for schools, and it's frustrating for us too, but we hope to be doing a better job of that in these future things. And we can learn from how we're doing this one and do that better. So that was just the parting thought. Paul.
Okay. Let me see. Was there so, you know, what Tom has pointed out is that there's a lot of, you know, ever-changing things, whether it's federally mandated or done by the state, or even things that just pertain to charter schools and their operations. And what we'll try to do is just partner with each other to try to get you this information in a quicker way and a clearer way so that schools can use that in planning for their operations. What I do need is, Tom, if you can send me your PowerPoint presentation, I'll get that out with the communication that gives the link to this recorded webinar so that they can share this with either their board treasurer or, you know, their financial manager or their school principal if they want to. So if you could send that to me right after we get off. And I will also send the chat record so that folks can know what kind of questions came up and what follow-up we have to do. And then if this worked for you, if you could just send us a quick, you know, email that said, you know, how we can make it better for you in the exchange of using these online meetings, or, you know, how we can improve, or, you know, did it work for you? Is this an easier way that maybe instead of always trying to, you know, do the long meetings, that maybe we could, you know, do some of them, get the right information to you in a good way. Okay, so I hope it's okay, but I've got to scoot to head off to the airport. And if there's any follow-up questions, I will send out the email to Tom. I will send out the blast email and send it out to Tom, so anyone who responds, those questions will go directly to Tom by email. Okay? Is that okay with everybody? If there's any, like, just questions, I know that there was a question from Sue, and we'll get that addressed in the FAQ. And I think if it's okay, we're going to go ahead and end the meeting unless someone has a burning question that they have to ask right now. Okay, that's good. I do have business manager from Kamaili that gave me her email address, so we'll make sure that you're on that. Brandy.
Oh, no, Janet.
Oh, Janet. Sorry, Janet.
Yes.
Okay, got Janet. Do you have a burning question to ask Tom?
Well, you know where to reach me.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, much appreciated, everyone, for joining, and we'll follow up and get this all out to you guys. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you, Lynn.